The shuttle descended through the violent orange atmosphere of Karthos-IV, like a coffin being dragged through fire. Outside the reinforced viewing ports, rivers of molten stone cut glowing scars across black mountains while electrical storms tore through the clouds with enough force to disable military cruisers. The world had earned its designation centuries earlier when the Galactic Coalition classified it as a Level 9 Deathworld, a category reserved for planets where survival itself bordered on statistical impossibility. Most species required sealed armor merely to breathe on the surface. Gravity measured nearly twice the galactic standard. The air contained trace toxins lethal to softer respiratory systems, and predators large enough to hunt armored transports roamed the volcanic forests beyond the Academy perimeter. Yet despite the planet's horrifying reputation, the Coalition had constructed one of its most prestigious military institutions there. The reasoning was brutally simple. If a recruit survived training on Karthos-IV, then no battlefield in the galaxy could truly break them. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of species sat restrained inside the transport shuttle as turbulence rattled their bones and fear spread silently through the cabin. Some stared at the floor, others whispered prayers to ancient gods. A few openly trembled beneath their breathing masks. The only individual who appeared remotely comfortable was seated near the rear cargo wall, with his boots crossed casually over a crate marked emergency rations. The human recruit, Elias Carter, watched the storms outside with the relaxed expression of a tourist admiring scenery during a road trip. He chewed lazily on a protein bar while the rest of the shuttle looked ready for execution. Across from him, a reptilian cadet named Ravager narrowed his golden eyes with visible irritation. The Drathri were known throughout the Coalition for their physical endurance and military discipline. Yet even Ravager's scales had turned pale since entering Karthos' orbit. "You understand where we are landing, human?" he finally asked in heavily accented trade speech. Elias shrugged. "A training academy." Ravager's tail twitched sharply. "A graveyard pretending to be a school." Several nearby cadets nodded in agreement. Elias simply took another bite from the protein bar. "Looks manageable." The silence that followed carried genuine disbelief. One of the insectoid recruits made a clicking noise that translated roughly into nervous laughter. Another cadet whispered that humans truly were insane. Elias had heard variations of that statement his entire life among alien crews. Humanity's reputation had spread quickly after joining the Coalition only 12 years earlier. Earth itself had horrified xenobiologists. The planet possessed unstable tectonic activity, aggressive weather systems, countless apex predators, harmful bacteria in nearly every ecosystem, and oceans deep enough to conceal creatures resembling nightmares. Even Earth's gravity exceeded the galactic norm by a dangerous margin. To most civilized species, humans seemed biologically engineered for suffering. Unfortunately for everyone else, humans had adapted so thoroughly to hardship that they rarely recognized danger until it became catastrophic. The shuttle slammed violently against the landing platform, forcing several cadets to cry out in alarm. Warning sirens blared through the cabin while hydraulic clamps secured the transport against hurricane-force winds outside. A metallic voice echoed overhead. "Welcome to Karthos Military Academy. Survival rates for first-year cadets currently stand at 41%. Please exit in an orderly fashion." That announcement did not improve morale. The rear hatch opened with a hiss, instantly flooding the cabin with suffocating heat. The atmosphere itself felt heavy, pressing against lungs and muscles like invisible weights. Several recruits struggled immediately upon standing. One collapsed before even reaching the ramp. Medics rushed forward while instructors barked orders through external speakers. Elias rose slowly from his seat, stretched his shoulders, and grabbed his duffel bag. The increased gravity pulled hard against his body, but it felt strangely familiar, like hiking with extra gear during humid summers back home in Tennessee. He stepped down the ramp into chaos. Lightning flashed overhead. Ash fell like dirty snow across the landing zone. Massive armored instructors towered near the receiving gate while drones scanned arriving cadets for medical instability. A four-legged predator howled somewhere beyond the perimeter walls. producing a deep vibration that many recruits visibly flinched from. Elias inhaled carefully through his nose. Sulfur, smoke, rain, burned metal. It reminded him vaguely of industrial zones near old factories on Earth. Cadets, roared an enormous instructor belonging to the Gorvik species. The creature stood nearly 9 feet tall, covered in gray armored hide scarred by countless battles. From this moment forward, weakness becomes your enemy. Karthos does not forgive hesitation. This academy does not reward fear. Those unable to adapt will be removed permanently. Nobody needed clarification regarding what permanently meant. The Gorvik instructor paced slowly before the exhausted rivals. Tomorrow begins the physical adaptation examination. Historically, 70% of recruits fail before completion. Several cadets exchanged horrified glances. Elias adjusted his duffel strap and wondered whether academy food would be decent. Hours later, after medical screenings and equipment assignments, the recruits gathered inside a massive dormitory carved directly into volcanic stone beneath the academy fortress. The structure resembled a bunker more than a school. Thick steel supports lined the walls while emergency blast doors separated every corridor. Outside, storms continued hammering the mountains with relentless fury. Exhausted cadets collapsed onto bunks or reviewed survival manuals in desperate silence. Elias sat at the edge of his assigned bed cleaning dirt from his boots. When another recruit approached cautiously, she belonged to the Lyran species. Tall and silver-skinned with luminous blue markings across her neck and cheeks. "You really are not frightened, are you?" she asked quietly. Elias looked up. "Should I be? Everyone is." She gestured around the dormitory. "Some recruits spend years preparing for Karthos. My government selected only 3 candidates from our entire military." Elias offered a tired smile. "Back home we had summer camps rougher than this." The Lyran woman stared at him as though unsure whether he was joking. Before she could respond, emergency alarms suddenly erupted throughout the dormitory. Red lights flashed overhead. A mechanical voice thundered through hidden speakers. "Environmental breach detected. All recruits report immediately to surface." Training grounds. Groans and panic spread instantly across the room. Cadets scrambled into protective gear while instructors shouted through corridors. Elias followed the crowd upward through narrow stairwells until they emerged onto a gigantic outdoor arena surrounded by electrified walls. Rain poured from the sky in heavy sheets. Despite the intense heat rising from nearby lava channels, hundreds of recruits assembled under miserable conditions while instructors observed from elevated platforms. One cadet collapsed after only minutes in the gravity field. Another began vomiting from atmospheric toxicity exposure. The Gorvik instructor stepped forward again. "Welcome to your first lesson. Karthos attacks without warning. Adaptation determines survival." Massive gates opened around the arena. Mechanical drones rolled onto the field carrying weighted packs, oxygen restrictors, and combat harnesses. Murmurs of dread spread through the recruits. "You will complete a 20-kilometer endurance trial through volcanic terrain," announced the instructor. "Failure to finish before nightfall results in expulsion." A horrified silence followed. Many cadets already struggled merely standing upright. The idea of crossing volcanic wilderness under Karthos' gravity sounded suicidal. Elias glanced toward distant mountains barely visible through storms. 20 kilometers? He muttered. "That's it." Nearby recruits turned toward him with disbelief. The starting horn echoed across the arena. Chaos erupted immediately. Cadets stumbled forward under crushing equipment loads, while rain and mud transformed the volcanic pathways into deadly traps. Instructors monitored progress from armored transports overhead. The terrain itself seemed determined to kill them. Sharp obsidian rocks sliced through boots. Toxic steam vents erupted unpredictably from cracks in the ground. Predatory creatures circled distant ridges waiting for weakness. Within the first hour, medical evacuation drones removed dozens of recruits suffering exhaustion, fractures, respiratory collapse, or panic attacks. Elias maintained a steady pace near the center of the formation. Sweat soaked his uniform almost instantly, but his breathing remained controlled. Years of hiking, construction work, amateur boxing, and stubborn human persistence carried him forward while others deteriorated rapidly around him. He occasionally paused to help fallen cadets regain footing, earning confused stares each time. Why waste energy assisting competitors? Because leaving people behind felt wrong. Simple as that. By midday, the situation became catastrophic. Heat levels rose beyond predicted ranges while storms intensified overhead. A section of the path collapsed near a lava trench, injuring several recruits. One of the insectoid cadets suffered complete muscular failure beneath the gravity pressure. Another screamed after spotting movement beneath the mud only moments before a scaled predator burst upward and attacked. The transport carrier crossed silently above the volcanic wasteland, while storm clouds swallowed the sky in layers of black ash and crimson lightning. Inside the armored troop bay, Squad 17 sat strapped into crash seats beside 12 other surviving teams from the academy. No one spoke much anymore. Karthos had burned unnecessary confidence out of them days earlier. Armor plating rattled violently beneath turbulence while warning alarms flickered overhead. Outside the narrow viewports, endless mountains of jagged obsidian stretched across the horizon like the broken teeth of some ancient god. Rivers of lava illuminated the darkness below in glowing red veins. Every cadet understood the truth now. Training on Karthos was not preparation for war. Karthos itself was war. Commander Graal's voice thundered through the transport speakers without warning. Listen carefully. Your next assessment begins immediately upon deployment. Holographic. Maps activated throughout the cabin showing a massive region labeled Sector Null. Even veteran-looking instructors nearby appeared uneasy studying the terrain. Communication systems within Sector Null are unreliable. Environmental hazards exceed Academy safety thresholds. Rescue response is not guaranteed. Several cadets exchanged nervous looks at that statement. Graal continued without emotion. Each squad must survive 48 standard hours, recover navigation beacons hidden across the wasteland, and reach the extraction zone before orbital nightfall. One recruit raised a trembling hand. Commander, what opposition should we expect? Silence lingered for a moment too long. Then Graal answered coldly, everything. The transport floor suddenly opened beneath them. Cadets shouted in alarm as deployment harnesses launched entire squads downward into the storm-covered darkness. Elias felt violent winds slam against his body while gravity dragged him toward the volcanic wilderness below. His descent thrusters activated seconds before impact, barely slowing the fall enough to avoid shattered bones. He crashed hard across black ash and rolled behind volcanic stone, while lightning exploded across the sky overhead. Round him, other members of Squad 17 landed roughly through heavy smoke and burning wind. Celine hit the ground awkwardly, but recovered quickly. Vakar slammed into the ash like a meteor before rising with an angry roar. One of their remaining squadmates fractured an ankle. Immediately upon landing, above them, the transport vanished, back into storm clouds without hesitation, abandoning the recruits completely. Well, Elias muttered while brushing ash from his sleeves. That was rude. No one appreciated the joke. The environment itself felt hostile beyond description. Heat waves distorted the air while volcanic tremors shook the ground beneath. Their boots every few minutes. Ash storms reduced visibility to less than 50 meters. Worse still, their communication units produced nothing except static interference. Celine checked her scanner repeatedly before lowering it with visible concern. No signal. We're isolated. Vakar surveyed the wasteland carefully. Movement detected nearby. Elias followed his gaze toward distant rock formations, where enormous shadows shifted briefly through the smoke before disappearing again. Something alive watched them already. All right, Elias said calmly. First priorities, shelter, water, high ground, and avoiding whatever nightmare creatures live out here. One squadmate stared at him in disbelief. How are you speaking? Calmly right now. Elias adjusted the survival pack across his shoulders. Panicking uses energy. The squad moved cautiously through Sector Null while darkness thickened beneath the storm clouds. Every kilometer revealed new horrors, forests of blackened stone sharp enough to slice armor apart, pools of acidic rainwater bubbling between cracks in the earth, Skeletons of enormous creatures half buried beneath volcanic ash. At one point they discovered the wreckage of an Academy drone, ripped apart by something powerful enough to twist. Reinforced metal like cloth. No one enjoyed imagining what kind of predator could accomplish that. Hours later they reached the remains of an abandoned mining station, built directly into a canyon wall. Rusted support beams leaned dangerously, while old floodlights flickered weakly against the darkness. The structure looked unstable, but it offered temporary shelter from the storms. Squad 17 entered cautiously with weapons raised. Inside, silence dominated everything. Dust covered old equipment terminals. Broken transport crates littered the floor. Emergency warning signs blinked faintly through failing power systems. Elias studied the station carefully while Celine activated portable lights. "This place was evacuated fast," she whispered. "Or eaten fast," Vakar replied grimly. That possibility became far less theoretical moments later. A distant metallic scream echoed somewhere deeper within the station. Everyone froze instantly. Another sound followed. Heavy footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Something moved in the darkness ahead. Celine tightened her grip on her rifle. "Please tell me that's structural damage." Elias listened carefully for several seconds. Then he sighed. "Nope, definitely." Footsteps. The emergency lights suddenly died. Complete darkness swallowed the station. One terrified squadmate fired instinctively into the blackness. The pulse flash illuminated something enormous crawling across the ceiling overhead. Too many eyes. Too many limbs. A shriek exploded through the station as the creature dropped directly into the squad. Chaos erupted instantly. Elias barely shoved Celine aside before massive claws tore through the space where she had been standing. Vakar charged the monster head-on with a furious roar. While pulse rounds flashed wildly through the darkness, the creature moved horrifyingly fast, smashing one cadet against a support pillar hard enough to crack armor plating. Elias grabbed a broken metal rod from the floor and slammed it across the predator's jaw, while shouting toward the others, "Fall back, funnel it through the corridor." The squad retreated toward a narrow maintenance tunnel while the creature pursued aggressively. Behind them, emergency lights flickered back online briefly, revealing the predator fully for the first time. It resembled a fusion between an insect and a reptile, standing nearly 3 meters tall with armored black skin and bladed forelimbs dripping acidic saliva. Multiple glowing eyes tracked movement independently while rows of hooked teeth clicked together hungrily. Celine's voice shook slightly. "What in the stars is that?" Elias backed slowly toward the corridor entrance. "Something I absolutely never want as a pet." The predator charged. Vakar intercepted it with brutal force, tackling the creature sideways into mining equipment while Elias and Celine opened fire together. Pulse blasts shattered chunks of armored hide, but failed to stop the monster completely. The creature screamed and slashed wildly, cutting deep across Vakar's shoulder armor. Blood splattered across the floor. "Move," Elias shouted. The squad retreated deeper into the narrow corridor while the injured Drathri stumbled. Behind them, the predator pursued immediately, but the confined tunnel finally limited its mobility advantage. Elias spotted damaged fuel lines running along the corridor ceiling and made a split-second decision. "Celine, shoot the pipes when I say." What are you doing?" Elias ignored the question completely. Instead, he turned and sprinted directly toward the charging monster. Every member of Squad 17 screamed at him to stop. The creature lunged forward, with claws extended wide enough to tear him apart instantly. Elias waited until the last possible second before diving sideways. Beneath the attack, the predator slammed into the corridor wall exactly beneath the damaged fuel pipes. Now, Celine fired instantly. The corridor exploded. Flames engulfed the tunnel in a violent wave that hurled Elias across the floor while the predator shrieked. Inside the inferno, burning debris collapsed around the creature as fuel ignited throughout the maintenance sector. Smoke flooded the station rapidly. "Run!" Elias coughed. The squad escaped barely seconds ahead of the spreading firestorm. They burst from the mining station into freezing ash rain, while explosions echoed behind them through the canyon. Part of the structure collapsed entirely. burying the burning predator beneath molten debris. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Vakar grabbed Elias violently by the front of his armor. "You charge the beast alone." "Technically," Elias wheezed, "I charged the fuel pipes." "That was suicide." Elias blinked tiredly through smoke-covered hair. "Worked though." Vakar stared at him with complete disbelief before finally releasing his grip. Celine approached slowly, still breathing hard from adrenaline. Humans truly are impossible. Elias looked toward the burning station behind them. "Nah, just adaptable." Before anyone could respond, distant screams echoed somewhere across Sector Null. Not one scream. Many. The squad turned toward the sound instinctively. Far beyond the canyon ridges, flashes of combat illuminated the darkness while monstrous roars rolled across the wasteland. Beneath the storm-filled sky, something terrible was hunting the other squads now. The screams continued across Sector Null long after the explosions faded behind Squad 17. They echoed through the volcanic canyons in distorted waves carried by ash storms and thunder, sometimes sounding painfully close, sometimes impossibly distant. Nobody spoke while moving through the darkness. Even Elias had stopped joking for the moment. The situation had changed. This no longer felt like a military assessment. It felt like the Academy had deliberately abandoned them inside a predator-infested graveyard, just to observe who survived. Vakar walked at the front despite blood still leaking from the torn armor. Around his shoulder, the Deathworld warrior refused medical assistance every time Celine offered. Pride mattered deeply to his species, though Elias noticed the larger alien occasionally struggling to keep pace. Behind them, the injured squadmate limped badly across unstable volcanic terrain, while lightning illuminated enormous shapes moving across distant ridges. "Something's following us," Celine whispered quietly. Elias nodded without looking back. "Yeah, been tracking us for almost 20 minutes. That answer immediately terrified everyone else. "You knew?" One squadmate hissed nervously. "Could smell it whenever the wind shifted." Vakar glanced sideways at the human. Humans track predators through scent, sometimes. Elias adjusted the survival knife at his side. Earth hunters do it all the time. The Deathworld muttered something in his native language that probably translated into disbelief or insanity. They eventually reached higher ground overlooking a massive volcanic valley split by rivers of glowing lava below. Ancient stone pillars rose from the ash like skeletal remains of forgotten civilizations. Near the center of the valley, partially hidden beneath smoke and darkness, stood the ruins of another abandoned facility. Celine activated her scanner carefully. Navigation beacon detected inside the structure. "Of course it is," Elias sighed. The Academy clearly enjoyed placing objectives inside places designed to kill people. Before descending toward the ruins, Elias suddenly crouched near a patch of disturbed ash beside the ridge path. He studied the ground silently while storm winds whipped around the squad. "What is it?" Celine asked. Elias pointed toward enormous tracks, pressed deep into the volcanic dust. Something huge had passed through recently. The footprints resembled those of a giant reptilian predator, except each claw mark was large enough to split stone. Nearby rocks showed deep gouges where something sharp had dragged across them accidentally. Vakar's expression darkened instantly. "No." Celine looked between them nervously. "What?" The Deathworld answered quietly. "Ravagers, even." The wind seemed colder after that word. One squadmate swallowed hard. "I thought Ravagers were extinct." "So did most people," Vakar replied grimly. Elias stood slowly while studying the tracks stretching toward the valley below. "I'm guessing that's bad." Celine looked visibly disturbed now. Ravagers were bioengineered war predators. During the first expansion conflicts, entire colonies were erased before the Coalition exterminated them. Apparently they missed a few. Elias muttered. Another distant roar echoed across Sector Null. This one sounded different. Deeper. Bigger. The sound rolled through the mountains, with enough force to vibrate ash loose from nearby cliffs. Every squad member froze instinctively. Then they heard gunfire. Heavy gunfire. Multiple squads, followed by screaming. "Move," Elias ordered immediately. Nobody argued. They descended rapidly toward the ruins while combat noises intensified somewhere behind the ridges. Occasionally flashes of plasma fire illuminated gigantic moving shadows in the storm clouds above. The valley, whatever hunted the cadets out there, was large enough to overpower entire squads. The abandoned facility turned out to be an ancient research station partially buried beneath volcanic rock. Cracked towers leaned dangerously while old coalition symbols remained barely visible across rusted walls. The front entrance had been ripped open violently, as though something enormous had clawed its way inside years earlier. "That's comforting," Elias said dryly. The squad entered carefully. Emergency lights flickered weakly throughout the corridors, powered somehow after decades of abandonment. Dust covered everything. Old laboratory chambers lined the walls, many still containing shattered containment pods and scattered research equipment. Celine studied faded warning symbols near one doorway and suddenly stopped walking. Her face lost color instantly. "What?" Elias asked. She pointed silently toward the damaged text printed across the wall. "Bioweapon Development Division." Vakar cursed under his breath. "The Academy dropped us inside a Ravager research facility?" "Looks that way," Elias answered quietly. One injured squadmate looked horrified. "Why would they do this?" No one had an answer. They moved deeper through the station, searching for the navigation beacon. Strange scratching sounds echoed occasionally through the ventilation systems overhead. Sometimes distant metallic impacts shook the walls lightly, like something massive moving somewhere below the facility. Nobody liked those noises. Eventually they reached the central laboratory chamber. The room was enormous. Rows of shattered containment cylinders stretched across multiple levels while broken cables sparked overhead. At the center of the chamber stood the navigation beacon, blinking steadily. Beside an inactive computer core, Celine exhaled in relief. There. But Elias didn't move. Something felt wrong. Too quiet. Too easy. His eyes drifted slowly toward one of the destroyed containment tanks nearby. Deep claw marks covered the inside surface. From the inside, "Don't touch the beacon yet," Elias warned quietly. Vakar immediately raised his weapon. "Why?" Elias scanned the darkness surrounding the chamber carefully. "Because if I designed a Deathworld training exercise, I'd never leave objectives unguarded." Almost instantly, the laboratory lights died. Darkness swallowed everything. Then came the sound, heavy breathing, not human breathing. Something enormous inhaling slowly somewhere inside the chamber. Red emergency lights flickered on one by one, and the squad finally saw it. The Ravager stood atop the upper laboratory platform, watching them silently. It was massive, at least 6 meters long from head to tail, covered in black armored scales layered over dense muscle powerful enough to crush vehicles. Her glowing eyes reflected the emergency lighting, while rows of hooked teeth protruded from a jaw designed purely for killing. Thick scars crossed its body like evidence of countless battles survived. But the worst part was its intelligence. The creature wasn't attacking blindly, that it was studying them, learning. One squadmate panicked immediately and opened fire. The Ravager moved so fast it barely looked real. One moment it stood motionless above them. The next it crashed directly into the squad formation. Screams erupted across the laboratory. The Predator tore through equipment and metal barriers effortlessly while pulse fire exploded against its armored hide with almost no effect. One cadet disappeared beneath its claws instantly. Another slammed against a laboratory wall hard enough to crack bone. "Spread out," Elias shouted. The Ravager lunged toward Celine. Vakar intercepted it mid-charge with suicidal bravery, slamming his entire body against the monster's side. The impact barely slowed the creature, but it gave Celine enough time to escape. Then the Ravager backhanded Vakar across the chamber like a broken toy. The Drathri crashed through shattered machinery and stopped moving. "Vakar!" Celine screamed. The Ravager turned toward her slowly. Elias stepped between them. Every survival instinct inside his brain screamed at him to run. The creature towered over him like a living nightmare bred for war. Hot breath rolled from its jaws, carrying the smell of blood and ash. Its glowing eyes locked onto the human carefully. Then something strange happened. The Ravager hesitated. Not fear. Recognition. Almost curiosity. Elias realized suddenly that the Creature expected panic. Every other species froze before apex predators eventually. Humans often did something else. They challenged. The Ravager growled deeply while lowering its body into attack posture. Elias slowly picked up a broken metal spear. From the laboratory floor, Selene stared at him in horror. Elias, you cannot fight that thing. He tightened his grip on the weapon. Probably not. He admitted. The Ravager charged. Elias moved instantly, not a way forward. He dove beneath the creature's first strike and slammed the metal spear directly into damaged scar tissue near its shoulder joint. The Ravager roared violently as the improvised weapon pierced deeper than expected. Selene fired simultaneously into the same wound. The monster thrashed furiously, destroying laboratory equipment around them while Elias barely avoided claws capable of cutting him in half. Then the creature adapted. Its tail whipped sideways with terrifying speed. The impact hurled Elias across the chamber hard enough to knock the air from his lungs completely. He slammed into the beacon platform and collapsed painfully onto the metal floor. The Ravager advanced slowly toward him, now confident, predatory. Blood dripped from its wounded shoulder while smoke rose from burned scales. Still, the creature looked unstoppable. Selene emptied her weapon into its back desperately. The Ravager ignored her completely. It wanted the human. Elias forced himself upright painfully while the predator approached. Every muscle in his body screamed. From the impact, his vision blurred slightly. Then he noticed something behind the Ravager. A damaged reactor conduit hanging loose from the ceiling. Sparks, fuel leakage. An idea formed instantly. A very human idea. Absolutely reckless. Selene. Elias shouted, "When I say run, grab Vakar and move." What are you doing? Trust me. That sentence never ends well. The Ravager lunged again. Elias sprinted directly toward the reactor platform beneath the hanging conduit, while the creature pursued aggressively behind him. Emergency alarms suddenly activated throughout the chamber as damaged systems overloaded. From combat impacts. Warning, core instability detected. The Ravager closed distance rapidly. Elias grabbed an exposed power cable from the wall and spun at the last possible second. Then he jammed the live cable directly into the fuel-covered wound in the monster's shoulder. Electricity exploded through the chamber. The Ravager roared in agony as sparks ignited leaking reactor fuel across its body. Flames erupted violently over the Predator's armored scales. "Run!" Elias screamed. Selene dragged the unconscious Vakar toward the exit while Elias dove across the laboratory floor. Moments before the damaged reactor conduit collapsed completely. The explosion that followed shook the entire valley. The explosion tore through the ancient research facility like the wrath of a dying planet. Fire erupted across the valley in a towering column of molten debris, while shockwaves shattered nearby stone pillars and sent rivers of ash cascading down the canyon. Walls. Squad 17 barely escaped before the upper levels collapsed entirely behind them. Selene dragged the unconscious Vakar through volcanic dust, while Elias stumbled after them, coughing smoke from his lungs. Pieces of burning metal rained across the wasteland as the ruined station disappeared beneath fire and darkness. For several minutes nobody spoke. They simply collapsed behind a ridge overlooking the burning ruins while thunder rolled above the valley. Elias lay flat against the ash-covered ground, staring at the storm clouds overhead, every muscle in his body screaming from exhaustion. His right arm bled from deep cuts left by flying debris. Half his armor had been burned black during the reactor blast. Nearby, Selene checked Vakar's condition with shaking hands. "He's alive," she whispered finally. Elias closed his eyes in relief. "Good." Selene looked toward him across the volcanic dust. "You nearly killed yourself." "Yeah," Elias admitted weakly. "Again, you fought a Ravager." "I noticed." "No," Selene said quietly. "You do not understand. Entire military units were destroyed by creatures like that during the expansion conflicts." Elias slowly sat upright despite the pain. "Guess it wasn't expecting Tennessee." "Survival instincts." Selene stared at him for several seconds before laughing helplessly from stress and exhaustion. The sound echoed strangely across the ash-filled ridge. Then movement appeared below. Floodlights. Heavy transports. Academy recovery teams. Squad 17 watched silently as armored vehicles surrounded the burning ruins while instructors searched the area for survivors. Overhead gunships circled through the storms, scanning for additional predator movement. Commander Graal himself emerged from one of the transports. The massive Gorvik surveyed the destruction carefully before his gaze settled upon Elias and the surviving squad members above the ridge. For the first time since arriving on Karthos, Elias thought he saw genuine disbelief in the commander's eyes. Medical teams rushed forward immediately once they reached the survivors. Vakar was stabilized and loaded onto a transport stretcher while drones scanned Elias repeatedly for internal injuries. One medic looked horrified reviewing the results. "This human should not still be conscious. I get that a lot," Elias muttered. Graal approached slowly through the ash storm while flames from the destroyed facility illuminated his scarred armor behind him. Around them, instructors whispered quietly while examining combat recordings recovered from damaged drones. The commander stopped directly before Elias. "You destroyed a classified research station." Elias blinked tiredly. "Technically, the Ravager helped. You engaged a bioengineered apex predator in direct combat. Technically, it engaged me first. You detonated a reactor core during a survival assessment." Elias thought for a moment. "Okay, that one's fair." Silence lingered between them while volcanic ash drifted through the wind. Then, unexpectedly, Graal asked a different question. "Entirely. Why?" Elias frowned. "Why what? Why continue fighting after survival probability collapsed?" The human looked toward Celine and the unconscious Vakar being loaded into medical transports nearby. "Because they're my squad." Graal studied him carefully. "Even knowing you could die," Elias gave a tired shrug. "That's kind of the job." The commander remained silent for several long seconds. Then he turned toward the gathered instructors and spoke words none of them expected. "Record this moment carefully." The officers exchanged confused looks. Graal pointed toward Elias. "Humanity does not survive because they are physically superior." His massive eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "They survive because they refuse to abandon each other after logic says they should." The surrounding instructors fell silent. For the first time, many of them finally understood why humans unsettled the galaxy so deeply. It was not strength, not aggression, not endurance. It was the terrifying human habit of continuing forward after fear, pain, exhaustion, and hopelessness should have stopped them completely. Hours later, the surviving recruits returned to Karthos Academy aboard medical transports, crossing the volcanic mountains beneath dawn skies. Casualty numbers from Sector Null were catastrophic. Nearly half the remaining cadets had been eliminated during the survival mission. Several squads never returned at all. Yet whispers spread rapidly through the Academy corridors. Stories about Squad 17. Stories about the human. Cadets spoke quietly about Elias Carter standing against a Ravager with nothing but scrap metal and stubbornness. Others repeated the tale of him calming Karn Beasts in the canyon, or carrying injured recruits through impossible terrain while casually discussing food. The legends grew larger every hour. By the time Elias regained consciousness inside the Academy Medical Wing, some recruits genuinely believed humans felt no fear whatsoever. Reality was less dramatic. Elias woke groaning painfully beneath bright medical lights, while every injury in his body reminded him he was definitely still mortal. "Morning, hero," Celine said from a nearby chair. Elias squinted toward her. "Please never call me that again. You destroyed a war predator." "I exploded a building very aggressively." Celine smiled faintly. Vakar said almost the same thing. "Speaking of him, he survived." Elias relaxed. Immediately, a moment later, the medical chamber doors opened and Vakar himself entered slowly, with fresh bandages crossing his shoulder and chest. The massive Drathri looked exhausted but alive. For several seconds he simply stared at Elias silently. Then, to everyone's surprise, Vakar lowered his head respectfully. Among the Drathri, that gesture was reserved for legendary warriors. "You fought beside your squad against impossible odds," he said quietly. "You returned for us when retreat was logical. You challenged death directly." Elias rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Honestly, I mostly improvised. that. Vakar replied, maybe the most human statement ever spoken. Celine laughed softly. Even Elias smiled. Outside the medical wing, Karthos storms continued raging across the mountains like always. The Deathworld remained brutal, violent, and unforgiving. But something inside the academy had changed. The alien recruits no longer looked at humans with simple confusion. Now they understood. Humanity came from a world that tried killing them every day for thousands of years. And instead of breaking, humans learned to smile, adapt, protect each other, and ask for seconds. Far above the academy fortress, Commander Growl stood alone on an observation platform overlooking the volcanic wilderness. Ash storms rolled across the horizon while distant. Predators howled beyond the walls. An instructor approached cautiously beside him. Commander, what are your orders regarding the human recruit? Growl watched the burning mountains silently. Finally he answered, watch him carefully. The instructor hesitated. Because he is dangerous. A low rumble escaped the commander's chest. Not laughter exactly, but close. No, Growl said while staring toward the horizon. Because one day the galaxy will desperately need more people like him.